Welcome back, Math 8. Go ahead and grab something to write with and something to write on. And recall what our puns are. When we're talking about slope, what does each of the letters stand for in puns? Go ahead and take a second and write down what each of the letters stands for. So I gave you the answers here, and as you can see, this one is our positive. This one in the middle, the yellow one, is undefined. That's when the line goes straight up and down like the y-axis, and your slopes are going to look like a number over 0. Remember when we talked about fractions way back? That's when you have that 0 as the denominator. You can't divide by 0. So we call those lines undefined. Then we have our negative slope, right? That's when we go to the left. And then we have our zero slope, So those are the fractions that are going to look like that. We're going to have 0 divided by a number or just our plain old 0. Those are the ones that match the x-axis. So they go the same direction as the x-axis, no angles at all. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about recognizing patterns in tables while graphing, and then we're going to fill in the blanks. Make sure you're open to embracing errors today. We're just practicing, we're just starting out, so don't beat yourself up if you get a few things wrong. We'll always make sure there's time to go back, check our work, reflect on our mistakes, and correct them, okay? Also, quick reminder, Dreambox, you need 5 lessons each week. Make sure you get those 5 lessons in. If you're not sure where to do those, go to the Google and then look up Washoe County School District and then Dreambox. Type that into Google, first link, take you right to the page, okay? Log in with your normal Washoe County login. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and try and fill in these missing numbers. You can see there are 2 missing blanks. So I want you to fill in this number here, and I want you to fill in this number here. What might those be? Take a second, write the table down, and fill in those blanks. Here's table B. This one has 3 blanks. So go ahead and take a second and try and fill in the 3 blanks for table B and see what you come up with. All right, here's those answers. For table A, you should have gotten 4 and 15. And for table B, you should have gotten 4 for X, 0 for one of our Y's, and 6 for another one of our Y's. How might I have done this? Did you get these same answers? If you didn't get these answers, go ahead and fix those errors now, and then take a second and try and write these as coordinate pairs. Let's recall how we write coordinate pairs. How do we write coordinate pairs? It's really easy to remember which letter comes first because it's alphabetical. So which comes first in the alphabet, X or Y? X always comes first, and then Y. So try and write each of these tables as a coordinate pair. I'll give you a hint. You're going to have 3 coordinate pairs for A and 4 coordinate pairs for B. Go ahead and do that now. How'd you do? Were you able to get all the coordinate pairs written? So if we look at this, we can see here that all of our X's are in a column in A. So our first X is 2, and that's my first X in my first coordinate. And then my first Y is 5, and that is my first 5. And then I just followed along with 4 and 10 and then 6 and 15. Doing the same thing for table B, except table B is just on its side, right? So 4, -4, and -4. And then -3 and -3. Following along, we have 0 and 0. And then 4 and 3. And 8 and 6. Okay, now we're going to draw a graph. If you have graph paper, that's great. If not, that's totally okay. I want you to look back up at those coordinate pairs. When we're looking at those coordinate pairs, think about how tall your x-axis has to be, or how long your x-axis has to be, and how tall your y-axis has to be to actually be able to graph all of those coordinate pairs. So what is our biggest x in our coordinate pairs above? What is our biggest x? Our biggest x was 8. And what was our biggest y? Our biggest y was 15. So that tells us that at least we need to make our y's 15 tall and our x's 8 long. But if we only do those, our points are going to be right at the very, very edge. So my suggestion would be to count out to 10 for our x-axis, and then out to 17 or 18 for our y-axis. Okay, because then you actually have a little bit of extra space. Because then we have a little bit of extra space after those points to actually finish drawing our line and our arrows. So you want to count up to about 17 for the y and about 10 for your x, just to make your life a little bit easier when graphing. I want you to notice here that it says to label your x and y axes. Remember, if you don't have these labeled, we're not going to look at them. Don't get a 0 because you didn't write x's and y's. Okay? You also need to remember that your x's and y's have positive and negative, so make sure you label your lines correctly. Go ahead and draw your graph and label your lines right now. Once you have your graphs labeled and your lines labeled, go ahead and look at just the coordinate points for A. The coordinate points for A. I want you to graph those coordinate points, draw a line, and then label the line. What might you label the line for A? What might you label the line for B? Let's start with A. Go ahead and do that now. So here is what line A looks like. Go ahead and try line B now. Go ahead and try line B. And there's what line B might look like. Okay, so hopefully you can see that I extended the lines. And this is what your lines are going to look like depending on how you numbered. So let's give C and D a shot. Go ahead and fill in the blanks for C and D. Really think about this. These ones might be a little bit more challenging. We're stepping up our game a little bit here. Okay? So give these ones a shot. They have a few more blanks and see how you do. All right. So here's the solutions for C and D. How did you do? Go ahead and take a second, fix any of your errors that you may have made, and then write in words how you might explain a couple of those errors to a second grader. Remember, second graders don't have your 8th grade vocabulary, so try and use smaller words and really explain that to a second grader. And you're going to write this down, please. Thank you. So, same C and D. We're looking at the same C and D now. So, how would you show your patterns? We filled in the blanks, but does that show your work or does that just show the answer? And we always say you have to show your work. It's worth points on tests when you show your work. So how would you show your work? Well, let's think about this. What is the difference between -6 and -12? +6. And what's the difference between -6 and -3? And -3 and 0? Perhaps we're starting to see a pattern. Okay, so now let's do the same here. What is the difference between 12 and 4? -8. And between +4 and 0? What about 0 and -4? Maybe another -4? How about -4 and -8? Go ahead and try D really quickly. So here is the pattern for D also. So the pattern for D is very consistent. What's the difference between the pattern for D and the pattern for C? Well, the pattern for D, all of the numbers start at the same number up here and end at the same number down here. They start at the same here, end at the same here. All the way through, they're the same. But what about with C? We've got a +6 and then we've got a +3. We've got a +8 and then or a -8 and then we've got a -4. But what do you notice about +6, +3, -8, -4? What if we write these as a fraction? What do you notice about those? You might notice that those are equivalent. If we divide -8 by 2, we get -4, and if we divide 6 by 2, we get 3. So those are equivalent fractions. So how do you find the slope looking at these tables, right? Because everything we're talking about is about slope and y equals mx plus b and that slope-intercept form and linear equations. So how might this work in with slope? What is slope? Really quickly, write down all the words that you know that mean slope. So here's all the words that we've talked about in class. So we're looking for slope. Well, does the steepness really help us much? It's important to know, but we can't really tell the steepness or we're not trying to find the steepness, we're trying to find the slope. What about direction? We can definitely tell direction by looking at slope, but will this help us find the slope from these tables? Probably not. What about m? Does m help us? We know m is the variable that represents slope, but it probably isn't going to help us. That leaves us with rise over run and delta y over delta x. Well, we know that rise means to go up or down the y-axis, and we know that delta y is talking about y. Where in these tables do we have y? We have a y here and we have a y here. Okay, what about run? We know run means to go along the x-axis, and we know delta x represents the x-axis. And we've got an x here in this table and an x here in this table. So perhaps we would be able to tell slope based on those. But we also decided that the patterns represent how high we can based on the -4 and the +5. We were able to say that every x goes down by 4 and every y goes up by 5. Or for C, every x goes up by 3 and every y goes down by 4. Because we said that if we reduce -8/6, we get -4/3. So how do we write all of that as a slope? We say our amount that changes for y, so our amount that changes for y, which is the representation delta y, divided by the amount that changes for x, represented by delta x, is our slope. So for C, our slope is going to be what? What is our representation for C? Well, our y we said was -4, and our x we said was +3. And we always say that slope is easiest when it's a fraction. So what is the slope for D? Well, our change in y changes how much each time? 5. And x changes how much each time? 4, -4. So we can write that as 5/-4. You can also pull that negative out front and just have a -5/4. Okay? One last thing. I want you to go back and show the patterns the way that we did for C and D. I want you to do that for A and B. And then I want you to define the slopes for A and B. Okay? Remember, those slopes are defined by the change in y over the change in x. And your last reminder, Dreambox, this week, 5 lessons. Make sure you do them. Thank you. Have a great week.